Wyoming Territory, August 1878. The wheels of the half-loaded wagon groaned over dry earth as it came into view through the heat shimmer. A lone figure slumped on the bench seat, reins loose in her hands. Her bonnet was gone, sun in her eyes, and her dress was dust-caked and torn at the hem. Vera Fairburn did not look back. She had not spoken since noon, when the man driving the lead wagon told her to turn around and go home. His voice as cold as the iron branding irons they used back in town. He did not even wait for her to respond. He just jerked his chin at the second wagon hers and said, "Take what you brought. We don't have room for more mouths." She had brought flour, dried apples, a sack of beans, 2 quilts, and her stitching frame. They left the beans, took the rest. The town of Sweetwater Ridge had decided they no longer needed her. Not her medicine, not her hands, not her heart. They sent her back with the wagon half full. By the time she reached the edge of the open valley, the first orange flickers of dusk were stretching over the plains. Her throat was dry. The wind caught her hair and whipped it across her face. She did not flinch. She had 2 choices: go back the way she came, or let the sun set on her and disappear into the basin. A shadow moved near a cluster of cottonwoods up ahead. A man on horseback stepped out from the trees, reins in one hand, a rifle slung on his back. Vera reached for the small pistol tucked beneath the seat cushion. He raised a hand, palm open. "I am not here to rob you," he said, voice low and steady. "I saw your wagon from the ridge." She did not answer. Her fingers stayed on the pistol. He dismounted. Slowly. Hands still up. Boots crunching grass. "They sent you back alone?" he asked. Vera nodded once. He stepped closer. His face came into better view, sun-browned, strong-jawed, early 30s maybe. Dark hair under a weather-worn hat. His shirt was sweat-dark at the collar. He looked like he had been riding all day. "They did not deserve you anyway," he said. "Where were you headed?" She finally spoke. "They wanted me to help with the new settlement. I brought medicines. Herbs. They changed their mind." He looked into the wagon. "You still carrying laudanum?" 2 bottles. One cracked. He nodded. "My name's Vaughn O'Connor. I have a place about 2 miles west. Creek runs near it. You are welcome to come rest." "I do not know you." "No, ma'am. But I know what it feels like to be shut out." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she clicked her tongue and flicked the reins. The wagon moved forward. He mounted and rode beside her. The cabin was modest, a single-room structure with a lean-to stable, smoke curling from a chimney, and a boy of about 8 sitting on the porch, whittling a stick. "Carell," Vaughn called. "We have company." The boy stood. "Is she staying?" "Just for supper. Maybe the night." Vera looked between them. "Your son?" "My nephew. My sister died last year." Carell gave her a shy nod, then darted inside. They ate stew with hard bread. Vera sat stiff at the table, watching Vaughn feed the boy first. When Carell fell asleep on the floor rug beside the fire, she allowed herself to relax just a little. Vaughn poured her a tin cup of water and sat across from her. "You got family?" he asked. "No. My husband died 2 winters ago. I tried to stay in Sweetwater Ridge. I treated fevers, helped birth 3 children. They said I was too soft on the wrong kind of people." He nodded like he understood. She sipped her water. "You live here alone?" "Carell and me." "That is enough." They sat in silence for a while. "Why did you help me?" she asked finally. "Because I could tell you needed it. And because I know what it looks like when someone walks away from the world with nothing left but dust behind them." She looked down at her hands. "You are not broken, Vera." She blinked at the sound of her name. She had not told it to him, not out loud. He must have seen it scrawled on the side of her crate earlier. "You can rest here," he said. "No one will send you away." She nodded. He stood. "I will take the cot. You take the bed. I will sleep near the fire." "You will sleep in the bed," he said gently. "It has been a long ride." She hesitated, then nodded again. That night, Vera lay on the straw-stuffed mattress, staring at the low ceiling beams. The wind rustled through the trees outside. She could hear Vaughn's quiet breath from the cot near the hearth. The boy snored softly. For the first time in months, she felt safe. By morning, she had made up her mind. "I will not go back to Sweetwater Ridge," she told him as she ladled hot water into a basin. "But I can still be useful." He looked up from where he was mending a fence post. "You want to stay?" "I want to help. If you will have me." He stood slowly, wiping his hands on a cloth. "You can stay as long as you want, Vera." She felt her chest warm at the sound of her name from his mouth again. That afternoon, she ground herbs while Vaughn and Carell cleared brush near the creek. She found herself looking toward the trees often, waiting for his voice to call out, for the sound of his boots on the porch. And each time he came into view, she felt something bloom in her ribs, something that had not stirred since before her husband's death. The next evening, he brought her a new tin cup. "Yours had a crack," he said. She took it from him, fingers brushing his. His hand did not pull away. By the third night, she had moved her things inside the cabin without needing to ask. Vaughn built a second shelf for her jars and salves. Carell watched them both, quiet but smiling more. "You are not just passing through anymore," Vaughn said as they stood under the stars one night, watching the fireflies blink along the creek. "You know that, right?" She looked up at him. "I know." He reached for her hand. She let him take it. Neither of them said another word. They did not need to. And in that quiet, beneath the wide sky, Vera knew she had not been sent away. She had been sent home. Vera stood barefoot in the creek, hem of her dress tucked up into her waistband, sleeves rolled to the elbow. The morning sun filtered through the cottonwoods, dappling the water with shifting gold. In her hands, she held a bundle of yarrow she'd foraged just beyond the northern ridge, roots washed clean and stems already trimmed. Vaughn's voice came from the bank. "You always know what you're after, don't you?" She looked up, water swirling around her ankles. "Plants don't lie. They either thrive or they don't." He crouched near the edge, brushing soil from his hands with a slow swipe across his pants. "You always work like someone's watching. I worked for years with people waiting to pick me apart. Habits hard to unlearn." She stepped up onto the rocks, shaking droplets from her hands. "But I'm learning." Vaughn straightened. "You don't need to prove anything here." "I know that." She gave a small nod. "But I still like things done right." They walked back together, the air thick with the scent of sage and wet grass. Carell was out by the fence line, crouched beside a hole he'd dug halfway through the week. He looked up as they passed, a coil of wire in his hands. "You figure out where they're getting through?" Vaughn asked. "Tracks come from the south side. Rabbits mostly, but I saw a fox print this morning." Vera set the bundle of yarrow on the porch rail. "You'll need to raise the mesh higher if you want to keep the chickens safe." The boy nodded, already turning back to his work. Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of the turpentine she'd boiled down the night before. Her tools were arranged along the shelf Vaughn had built, each one touched with care. She lit the stove, measured oats into the pot, and added a pinch of salt from her dwindling tin. Vaughn came in behind her, pulling off his hat. "You always make breakfast like you're feeding a dozen. It's easier to cook once and make it last." He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You ever think about planting here?" She stirred the pot slowly. "I was thinking about that yesterday. Soil's dry, but near the creek bed there's promise." "I could clear a patch for you," he offered. "Somewhere close to the cabin so you don't have to haul water too far." Vera looked up. "You don't mind?" "I wouldn't offer if I did." She turned back to the stove, but something eased in her chest. After breakfast, Vaughn took the mule out to the far pasture, and Vera stayed behind to inventory the dried roots and crushed leaves she had stored away. Some had gone soft from the humidity. She'd need to rebuild her drying frame. She set to it with a split of hickory and sinew string she'd salvaged from an old pouch. Her hands moved steady, precise, as the sun climbed. Later, she found Carell sitting at the edge of the creek with a tangle of fishing line in his lap. His shoulders were tight, mouth drawn. "Line break?" she asked, settling beside him. "No, just caught on itself." She reached over, her fingers working through the knot. "You tie your lead too short. Fish'll feel the pull before the hook even sets." He washed her hands for a long time. "Did you have children?" "No," she didn't look up. "I wanted to. Wasn't meant to be." He didn't speak for a while. Then, "Do you miss your husband?" "Yes," she said, "but not in the way people expect. I miss who we were before everything turned hard." Carell nodded once and passed her the second spool. That evening, the sky turned lavender and soft. Vaughn returned with a bundle of cedar strapped behind the saddle. He unloaded it without a word, stacking it neatly along the side wall. Then he came to the porch, took the seat beside her, and rested his boots on the step. "I saw a deer trail up past the ridge," he said. "Could be fresh meat if I get out early enough tomorrow." She looked out over the land. "I could use the tallow. You still thinking about that soap?" I am. I've got line near ready. Just need the fat. He leaned back, eyes on the horizon. We're building something here. Slowly. But it's real. Vera turned toward him. That frightens me a little. Why? Because it's good. And I've learned not to trust good things. Vaughn didn't answer right away. Then he reached over, took her hand where it rested on her lap, and held it without force. You can trust this, he said. I'm not going anywhere. She looked down at their joined hands, the roughness of his palm against hers, and felt the earth settle beneath her in a way it hadn't in years. You're not afraid of what people might say? They've said worse. Let him talk. The light faded, and the stars came out one by one. Carell was asleep inside, breath soft through the cracked window. The wind carried the scent of cedar smoke. Vera leaned her head against Vaughn's shoulder. Maybe I wasn't meant to go with that wagon. No, he said. You were meant to end up here. And in that quiet, with her hand in his and the night wrapped close around them, she believed him. The first frost came early that year. Vera woke to a thin crust of ice along the edge of the wash basin and the faint creak of the cabin roof under a stiff wind. The rising cold stiffened her joints as she moved, but she kept her breath steady and her pace unhurried. Vaughn had left before dawn with the rifle and a length of burlap. He hadn't said where he was heading, only that he'd be back before supper. She pulled her shawl tighter and stepped outside. The fields had turned brittle, stalks of summer's last growth bowed and dulled. Carell was sitting cross-legged near the coop, pressing a broken hinge into place with the concentration of someone older than his years. You'll want to heat the screw before you hammer it in, she said quietly. He didn't look up, just nodded. Fire's still burning. I'll fetch the tongs. Inside, she found the iron warmed just enough in the coals and brought it out wrapped in a strip of hide. Carell held it with care, working without a word. He reminded her of a boy she'd known in Missouri long ago, her cousin's son, who'd once carved a wooden flute with a pocket knife and a week's worth of patience. That boy hadn't lived to see 15. She turned from the memory and busied herself with the last of the soap mixture. The tallow Vaughn had brought back days earlier had cured well. She worked it into the lye with a steady rhythm, stirring until her arms ached. When she poured it into the molds made from carved ashwood, she felt a quiet satisfaction settle in her chest. The sun was low by the time she saw Vaughn returning through the cottonwood break. His horse moved slow under the weight of the buck draped across its shoulders. He dismounted with a grunt, wiping his brow with the back of his wrist. Got lucky, he said, nodding toward the deer. Thought I'd lose it in the gulch, but it slowed enough to drop clean. Bring it behind the shed, she said. I'll fetch water for the blade. They worked in tandem, her hands sure as she peeled back the hide, his movements efficient and practiced. The silence between them wasn't heavy, it settled like an old quilt, familiar and close. Traded with a trapper up in the hills this morning, he said as he worked. Name's Rucker. Lives out near the canyon line. She glanced up. Honest. Looks it. Said he's got seed potatoes and some barley left over from summer stores. Might be worth making a trip. I could offer him salves. Maybe a bottle of the cough tincture. Vaughn nodded. I'll take you out there next week, if the weather holds. When the carcass was hung and the meat stored under salt, they stood in the dim light of the woodshed, the air thick with the scent of blood and pine. You're steady, he said. Always thought that was the most useful thing a person could be. I had to learn that. Life didn't hand me much I could lean on. He looked at her then, long enough that she felt the heat rise behind her ears. I trust you with everything I have, he said. That's not something I've said out loud in years. She didn't speak, not right away. Then she reached out, touched the edge of his sleeve. You don't have to say it. I already know. They walked back to the cabin together, the last light bending through the trees. Inside, Carell had arranged 3 bowls on the table and was slicing apples with a careful hand. Chickens are in for the night, he said. I put the trap near the burrow too. Vera set the pot on the stove. We'll check it come morning. Later, after the boy had gone to sleep, Vera sat on the floor near the hearth, her hands wrapped around a mug of boiled sassafras. Vaughn sat beside her, close enough that their sleeves brushed. I never thought I'd settle again, he said quietly. Never thought I'd want to. I didn't either. He turned his head, studied her face as though mapping it to memory. But now, she didn't answer with words. She leaned into him, slow and certain, her forehead resting against his shoulder. He wrapped his arm around her without hesitation, and she let herself breathe in the scent of cedar and flannel and earth. They stayed like that for a long while, the fire low, the wind forgotten. When they finally rose, it was wordless, but not uncertain. Something had shifted quiet and deep as the turning of the seasons, and nothing about it was hurried. The morning after the freeze, Vera stepped into the cabin's lean-to and found the last of the onions gone soft in their netting. She sorted through them slowly, setting aside what could be salvaged and feeding the rest to the chickens. The hens clucked and pecked at the mush near her boots, their feathers puffed thick against the cold. Inside, Vaughn was sharpening the smaller of the two skinning knives, his thumb testing the edge with quiet focus. He'd slept in a little later than usual. His shoulders had a stiffness to them now, a drag in his left arm that hadn't been there weeks before. "You favor that side more lately," Vera said, not lifting her eyes from the basin she'd filled with cider vinegar and a strip of muslin. "Got kicked in the shoulder by a mule 3 years ago," he replied, setting the blade down. "Didn't set right after. Gets mean with the cold." She wrung out the cloth and handed it to him. "You should say something sooner. Didn't figure I needed to. You've got eyes." She held his gaze. "I've also got salve that'll ease the ache if you'd stop pretending it doesn't hurt." He shrugged, but took the cloth and pressed it to the joint. "You always this direct?" "Only when I have reason to be." Vaughn chuckled low in his throat, the sound quiet and close. "I like it." That afternoon, they hitched the wagon and headed toward the canyon rim. The road was rougher than the trail that led to town, but Vera had asked to trade with the trapper herself. She wanted to see what passed for barter that far into the hills. The wind picked up as they reached the edge of the rock shelf. Vaughn guided the mule down the narrow path, without speaking, reins held light in his hands. Vera sat beside him, her bag of tinctures resting between her boots. She'd packed fever leaf oil, the last of her dried licorice root, and a small jar of honey hardened from the cold. They reached the trapper's homestead by mid-afternoon. The man, Rucker, had a face like worn tree bark and eyes that didn't miss much. He didn't speak more than necessary, but he offered them a place by the stove and a mug of tea that tasted faintly of birch. "You brought trade?" he asked Vera, glancing toward her pack. She set it down and opened it. "I've got pain oil, cough tincture, and poultice for burns. All sealed." He tested the jar seals with his thumb and nodded once. "Barley's in the sack by the door. Potatoes in the root cellar. Take what you think's fair." Vera didn't hesitate. She measured carefully, weighing the grain by feel, lifting each potato to check for softness. When she was done, Rucker handed her a small bundle of dried mint without explanation and turned back to the fire. They left with the wagon heavier and the sky rolling gray above them. Vaughn kept a steady pace, but Vera noticed his hands flexing more often on the reins. "You shouldn't have driven the wagon with your arm like that," she said. "We couldn't have carried that barley back between us. I could have taken the lines." He looked over at her. "You trying to take my pride now?" She set her jaw. "I'm trying not to watch you make things worse out of stubbornness." He gave a soft exhale through his nose. "You're not easy to argue with." "Then don't." They rode in silence after that, but it wasn't sharp, just settled. By the time they reached the cabin, the first drops of rain had started to fall, slow and cold. Carell opened the door before they reached the porch, holding up his sleeve to shield his eyes. "I brought in the firewood," he said, "and I checked the traps." Vera ruffled his hair as she passed. "Good. Soup will be ready soon." That night, after the boy was asleep, Vaughn stood at the window, looking out at the rain. "I never lived with a woman this long without expecting it to end," he said. "Always figured someone would walk away first." Vera sat at the table, drying herbs with a soft cloth. "I've left places where I was unwelcome, but this isn't one of them." "You sure?" She folded the cloth in her lap. "I don't stay where I'm not wanted." He turned from the window. "You're wanted." Her breath caught, just for a moment. "Then I'll stay." He crossed the room, slow and certain, and knelt beside her chair. His hand found hers, warm and calloused. She didn't pull away. "You and me," he said. "We'll make the rest of it together. Whatever comes." She leaned down, touched her forehead to his. "We already are." The fire dimmed behind them. Rain tapped gentle on the roof. And in the quiet that followed, there was nothing unfinished. Only the soft, steady rhythm of two hearts choosing to stay. The wind had changed again. It came from the north now, dry and sharp-edged, curling around the corners of the cabin and tugging at the eaves. Vaughn stepped outside with a bucket in hand, listening for the shift in the trees, the way the branches clicked against each other like brittle bone. He didn't speak, not even when the mule gave a restless stamp behind the stable. There was a stillness in him today, not quiet like before, but watchful like he was waiting for something he couldn't name. Inside, Vera wrapped a length of linen around a bundle of dried angelica root, folding the edges with care before tucking it into the storage chest. She moved slowly, measuring her steps. Her back had started to ache earlier in the day, a deep pull low in her spine from lifting the full grain sacks alone, while Vaughn had been up at the ridge line. She hadn't mentioned it. He would have carried them if he'd known. Carell was out with the neighbor's boy, Benji, helping mend a fence that had buckled under the last windstorm. Vera had watched them go, Benji leading the way with a coil of rope slung across his shoulder, Carell following with a hammer tucked under his belt. He'd grown leaner over the past months, taller too. His voice had changed without them noticing, rougher now, and his questions had turned sharper, less about the world outside and more about what made things last. Vera stood at the stove, stirring a pot of cabbage and smoked venison, when Vaughn came through the door, boots leaving a trail of dust across the floorboards. "I saw snow on the ridge," he said, pulling his gloves free. "Won't be long before it reaches us." She nodded without turning. "We'll need to bring in the last of the squash, and the ladder's still leaning against the barn roof. I'll take care of it before sundown." He hesitated, then stepped closer. "You're favoring your side." "I'm fine." He took the wooden spoon from her hand and set it down on the table. "You're not. Let me help." She didn't argue. He guided her to the chair near the hearth and knelt beside her, pressing his hand gently against the small of her back. She watched his face as he worked, the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the line of his jaw tight with concern. His fingers moved gently, tracing the ache with practiced pressure. "You should have said something," he murmured. "I didn't want to make it into a fuss." He looked up. "You don't have to bear everything alone, Vera. Not anymore." She reached for his hand and held it there against her back, warm through the cloth. "I know." That night, after Carell returned and the supper dishes were washed and dried, she stepped out into the yard. The moon hung low, casting silver across the frost-crisped grass. Vaughn followed her out, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders without a word. He stood behind her, close but not pressing, and looked out over the land. "I've been thinking about building another room." She tilted her head back slightly. "Why?" "So we've got space when the snow sets in. For you to dry herbs by the window. For Carell to work without breathing smoke. For us." Vera turned to face him. "You're talking about staying, Vaughn. Not just through the winter. For good." "I've never said it plain," he admitted. "But I want you here. Not as someone passing through. As my wife." The words settled between them like a drawn breath. She stepped in, rested her hands against his chest. "You're sure?" "I've been sure longer than I knew how to say." She nodded once. Then yes. In the weeks that followed, they built the new room together. Vaughn framed the walls while Vera shaped shelves from cedar and lined them with jars. Carell carved a sun pattern into the lintel beam with his pocket knife, and when the first snow came, it drifted soft against the window panes of a house that felt finally whole. The wedding was simple, just the three of them and the preacher from Willow Fork. Vera wore the same dress she'd arrived in, mended now at the hem, and Vaughn trimmed a sprig of juniper to pin at her shoulder. Carell stood tall beside them, holding the ring Vaughn had carved from bone and brass, and when the vows were spoken, he grinned without shame. That night, they sat around the fire, the three of them close, steam rising from mugs of spiced cider. Vaughn reached for Vera's hand and didn't let go. She leaned into him, her eyes soft with quiet joy. "You still have that wagon?" he asked her. She smiled. "It's out by the shed." "Good," he said. "You came here in it. But you're not leaving in it." "I never meant to." Outside, the snow fell thicker, blanketing the land in silence. And inside, in the warmth of the hearth and the steady rhythm of breath and belonging, Vera knew this was the life she had been meant to find, not at the end of the road, but at the beginning of something lasting. Years passed. The cabin aged with them, its corners settled deep into the earth. Carell grew into a man with steady hands and a voice that carried. He built his own place upriver, not far enough to be gone, but far enough to stand tall on his own. Vera's garden grew wide. Roots sunk deep into soil she turned with her own hands. Vaughn still rose early, still walked the fence line each day, but now he did it with her beside him, their steps in rhythm, their silences full of knowing. They loved each other with the kind of certainty that didn't need to be spoken again and again. It was in the way he filled the basin each morning, in the way she folded his shirts with the seams straight, in the way their hands found each other in the dark. And when the winter came, as it always did, they stayed for each other, with each other through every season, together.